Hey folks, my name is Vincent Nguyen from thecreativedojo.net, and today I'm here exclusively for a Tuts Plus. And today we're going to be taking a look at how to create this pseudo 3D iPhone within Adobe After Effects, purely using the built-in tools and the application itself. So if we get the little orbit tool here, we can actually orbit around the phone, and you can see that we have a pretty convincing 3D iPhone. We have the lock switch here, as well as the headphone jack. And then we have, of course, the volume buttons here and the silent button, as well as the dock connector on the bottom here. So overall, a pretty convincing phone. It should work just fine for what you're using it for, maybe to promote your app or your website. But whatever you need it for, it should do the job just fine, and it's pretty fun to create. We're going to create some pretty basic controls, as well as the gloss here. We can animate the gloss, and we just have a pretty convincing pseudo 3D phone. Now, there are many ways to create this thing. I'm going to show you one way on how I did it in this example here. So without further ado, let's hop into After Effects and just take a look at how I created this thing. So let's go ahead and create a new composition. New composition. And this is going to be the screen content for our phone. So whatever's in this composition is going to be the screen content of the phone. So we can easily replace whatever in the screen content here. So we'll just call this one screen content. And for the screen content resolution, we'll use the original iPhone Retina display resolution, whatever it is, 640 for the width and 960 for the height. And then we'll hit OK. That way, if you decide to drag in an iPhone screenshot like I have here, it's going to fit in 100% nicely here without any resizing needed. So whatever we place in this composition is going to be the screen content for phone. So that way you can go back and maybe put a movie file here, or maybe an image here. But for this case, I'll just put a placeholder screenshot of my phone here. And we're pretty much done with the screen content. You can always go back here and replace it with whatever you want. So let's go ahead and create the phone itself now. So let's go ahead and create a new composition. And we'll lock the aspect ratio for now. But we'll change the width to 1000. And then the height should be 1500. Hit OK. And this is where we're going to start building the front of the phone. So we'll call this composition here, I guess, front face. And let's go ahead and drag our screen content composition into this new composition here. And we'll just get the nice rounded rectangle tool here. And we'll just draw a nice shape, the general shape of our phone. So let's just start up here. Now, somewhere around there, we don't have to be too exact because we can always adjust all this a little bit later. Make sure that your fill is set to black. And then we can drag the shape layer underneath our screen content, and we'll just call this one black backing. So now that we have that, let's go ahead and adjust our phone here. I'm going to use the align panel just so that we can center things up a little bit easier here. So just press the center button, make sure that everything's kind of centered in the middle here, and then we can go into the contents, rectangle 1, rectangle path. Here we can adjust the roundness of the corners of our new shape. So I'm going to set mine to around 90. And that should kind of give that nice rounded corner for our phone. Of course, the size is a little bit off here, so I'm just going to play around with the size a little bit and make it a little bit thinner. And then I'm going to expand it in the height a little bit. Just somewhere around there. That's looking pretty nice. So that's pretty much the main black plastic of the phone. We can close that up. We'll duplicate this one, so Control Command D. And we'll call this silver frames. And this is going to be kind of the silver outline frame around the black plastic here. And we'll just hit S on the keyboard to scale it up. And we'll scale this one up. And we'll set the fill to kind of this medium gray color. Hit OK. Let me just scale it down a little bit. And then we can just turn off the transparency just so we can kind of see the outline of the phone. You know, just a very nice subtle stroke. You know, maybe we can even create this using a stroke, using the same black backing shape layer. But, you know, we'll create a separate one just for the heck of it. So now we have this very nice basic shape of the iPhone. Let's go ahead and work on some of these speaker details, as well as the camera lens, as well as the home button here. So I'm going to start off with the home button. I'm going to get the ellipse tool here, set the fill to almost pitch black, And then by holding down shift, we can constrain the proportion so we can draw a nice perfect circle. By the way, make sure that no layers are selected so we don't get a mask. If you have a layer selected and you use the shape tools here, you're going to get a mask instead of a shape layer. So just make sure that no layers are selected here. And we'll call this one home button. And we'll make sure that that thing is centered up as well. And we'll just kind of adjust it here. Perhaps scale it down. And then we'll go ahead and create a little logo within the home button here. So we'll go ahead and select the home button shape layer, and then we'll get the rounded rectangle tool once again. And then we'll just draw a nice rounded rectangle within the home button here. And then we'll set that rectangle to the stroke of white with 2 pixels. So in this home button shape layer, we have 2 shapes. We have an ellipse here as well as a rectangle. And we'll just move the rectangle around a little bit, kind of adjust it to the middle, just like that. And just like that, we have a very basic home button. We may want to go back into the ellipse here and just play around with the color of the ellipse, make it a little bit darker. Something like that. And then we can apply a bevel alpha onto the home button here. Set the light angle to 0 and set the edge thickness to around 1. Just so we have a very subtle bevel here. So that's looking pretty great. Now let's go ahead and focus on the actual speaker as well as the lens, front facing camera. So I'm just gonna grab the rounded rectangle tool once again, and if you can't access these, go ahead and just click and hold onto this little button here, and then you should be able to select these different types of tools here. So we'll select the rounded rectangle tool. We'll set the fill to kind of a dark gray, and we'll just draw a very nice thin strip for our speakerphone here. And then we'll set the stroke down to 0. We don't want a stroke. We'll center it up, and we'll leave it at that. See what it looks like. And that's looking pretty fine to me. Of course, see, this is where you can go many different ways. If you want to spend more time on the texture, you could. You can bring in Photoshop layers, textures, and texture this thing up. Spend more time adding more little details and bevels and such like that. But for this demonstration, I'm just going to show you the general overview of how to create this phone here. But a really nice way to get more detail and create more of a realistic approach is to maybe go on Google and find a nice layered PSD of an iPhone. And you know, those people spend a lot of time designing the small little details, and you can use that to kind of help you create your iPhone model in After Effects. So we'll call this one speaker. And then we're going to get the nice ellipse tool here and make sure that your speaker layer is selected. And we'll just draw a nice little circle by holding down shift once again. Kind of around the same size as the speaker, just a little bit larger. Just like that. And then with the ellipse selected, we'll change the color from a dark gray to kind of this nice indigo blue color. Kind of match the kind of lens color that we have here. And then if we toggle down the ellipse here, we can select the path, and then we can just adjust our lens up a little bit. And then we'll apply a bevel alpha to the whole speaker. And then once again, set the light angle to 0 degrees, and we'll just leave the edge thickness by default, just so we have a very basic speaker and lens here. So just like that, we created a very basic iPhone shape. Once again, if you want to be more precise into a lot more detail, then I highly suggest that you spend more time on it, as well as maybe get a layered PSD and use that instead. But this should kind of give you a general idea on how to create this in After Effects. So now that we have that done, let's go ahead and move on to the more fun stuff and kind of bring this iPhone to life here. So we're going to create a new composition. We'll call this main comp. And go ahead and uncheck the lock aspect ratio. We'll make this thing 720p. And we'll hit OK. And this is going to be our main composition. We'll drag in our front face composition into this main composition here. And this is where we're going to be doing all the extrusion and all the fun stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and scale this thing down a little bit to around there. And we'll call this one the control. And then we're going to duplicate this one. And we'll call this one gloss matte. And we're going to use this gloss matte composition here as kind of a matte for our gloss reflection shininess here. So let's go ahead and create a new layer, new solid. We'll make it a white solid. We'll call it gloss. Hit OK. And we'll drag our gloss layer underneath our gloss matte composition here. And we'll set the track matte here. If you don't see it, just toggle the switches / modes. Go to the track matte and set the track matte for the gloss to alpha matte. And what that's going to do is it's going to use the alpha channel to kind of mask out this white solid here. Just so we have a white solid in the shape of our phone. And then we can apply a linear wipe to our gloss layer. And that way we can kind of control the angle as well as the transition of our gloss. So we can animate this value here and get a pretty convincing nice gloss. Of course, we want to lower down the opacity to about 15% or so. But that should give you a really nice gloss and a really easy way to animate all this stuff. But I want to parent the gloss to our control layer here. And make sure that both these layers are 3D layers. We want them to be in 3D. And now we're going to start extruding this thing in kind of a pseudo After Effects way. So obviously After Effects does not have built-in extrusion unless you're in CS6 or you're using a third-party plugin. But in this demonstration, I'm just going to be using kind of a pseudo method, which we're going to be duplicating a whole bunch of layers and stacking them on top of each other. So I'm going to duplicate the control layer and make sure that this control layer is parented to our control layer. And we'll call this one extrusion. And let's go ahead and duplicate this extrusion composition 50 times or so. So I'm going to hit Control-Command-D and do it about 50 times until you get quite a bit of extrusion layers here. So give me a second. So just to be safe, we duplicated this thing around 60 times. And pretty much what we're going to do is we're going to push this thing back in Z space by 1 pixels as an offset for each of these compositions here. So if I create a new camera, and I just rotate to the side here, you're going to see what I'm going to do here. So as you can see, we have 60 extrusion layers all in the same place in space here. But if I hit P on the keyboard and then offset the position Z by 1 pixel, it's going to push one of these layers back in Z space by 1 pixel. So if I do that for the rest of the layers here, if we go hit P on the keyboard, I want to change this one to 2 pixels, 3, 4, and keep on offsetting these values by 1 pixels, and you should eventually get an extrusion for your phone. So as you can see, I've changed and offsetted the z-axis value by 1 pixel for each layer. So as you can see, I have 35, 36, 37, all the way up to 60 pixels here. So what that's doing is actually duplicating a whole bunch of these phone layers, and it's actually just pushing it all back by 1 pixels in the z-axis until we get a really nice extrusion here. So, you know, it's not perfect. As you can see, if we move to the side here, you can kind of see that we have a whole bunch of stacked layers on top of each other. And that's because we actually do. But for the most part, at pretty much every single angle besides directly on the side, it should look pretty 3D, in my opinion, and it should look pretty nice. So just like that, we have a very nice extruded iPhone, but it doesn't look quite like an iPhone yet. And then, of course, the back doesn't have our nice black backing to it right now. So let's go ahead and cover that up first. Let's go ahead and create that backing. So we'll just disable the camera for a second here. And we'll go ahead and create a new backing layer. So go ahead and duplicate the front face composition. We'll hit Control-Command-D. We'll call this back face. Now let's go ahead and go into that composition. And we'll delete the speaker. We'll delete the home button, and we'll delete the screen content. So this is just our backing right here. Let's go ahead and create the camera lens. So again, we'll be using the kind of dark indigo purple color, and we'll draw a small little shape here for our camera. Make it slightly larger, and then we'll create another one here on the side. And this is going to be for the LED flash, and we'll set that one to kind of this yellow mid white color. You know, something like that. You don't have to be too exact. And we'll apply a bevel alpha once again, just to give it kind of a nice shine to it. And of course, feel free to insert your own little logo here and your little slogan and some copyright text here. But for this demonstration, I'm just going to leave it at this. This is going to be the back of our phone. And we'll call this one lens and flash. Now let's go ahead and bring this composition into the main composition. And let's go ahead and add it to our scene. So we'll drag in the back face onto the main comp. And let's go ahead and just scale it down to match our control scale here. So I'm going to set the scale to 38%. I'll make it a 3D layer. And I want to kind of push this thing back in Z space. So if you remember, the last extrusion layer was at 60 pixels here. So I want to push this thing back one more than that. So hit P on the keyboard and set it to 61. We're just going to push it all the way in the back. And then we want to parent it to our control layer, of course. And then we'll drag the back face all the way down to the bottom of the stack here so things rendered out a little bit nicer. So just like that, we have our front face here, we have the side extrusions, and then in the very back we have our camera lens. And you may want to rotate that to kind of correct the rotation so we have the lens on the right side. But you know, I'll just leave it at that. So now that we have the basic shape of the iPhone done, let's go ahead and focus on the more fine details such as the bevel here. And as you can see, we're missing some very important details, which are the kind of black antennas that we have on the side of the phone here. And I've noticed that even though those little black bars that are, I think, antennas, even though they're very, very minor and small, they make a huge difference in selling the effect that this is an iPhone and not some kind of cheap Chinese knockoff. So those little black bars are very important, and it seems like without it, it seems like something's really missing on this iPhone here. So let's go ahead and go to the front face once again, and we'll go ahead and create those black bars very easily. So I'm going to go into the silver frames here. I'm going to duplicate it, Control Command D, and I'm going to call this one black bars. And I'll drag it above our screen content. And then I'll change the black bars color from a gray to kind of this dark black. And we'll just go ahead and shrink it down to a very narrow bar. And let's go ahead and position it right above the home button. I believe in the original iPhone, that is where these black antenna bars are. Not quite sure, but that should do fine. So as you can see, we have these nice little black bars here. Very, very minor, but it really does sell the iPhone effect for this phone here. And we'll just duplicate those black bars and drag one all the way up, I believe almost to the camera, but I'm not quite sure. So right about there. Leave it at that. Let's go back into our main composition here and check out our phone. See, now we have a more convincing iPhone feel. Now let's go ahead and add some very subtle bevels to our phone. As you can see, it looks like a very flat sandwich here. So let's go ahead and add a little bevel to our silver framing here. And I'm going to create these very, very subtle and strange bevels on our phone in a very strange way. But I find that it does a pretty effective job in doing it. So I'm going to go into the curves effect here and drag the curves into our first extrusion. And I'm going to raise the brightness up. I'm going to copy this curves effect, Control Command C, and I'm just going to paste it into these 10 or so layers of extrusion here. So when you paste it in, it creates this very, very subtle and minor bevel here, as you can see. And it kind of creates a really nice bevel look without really applying a bevel. And that's pretty cool and very, very quick. So now that we have our front bevel here, let's go ahead and apply bevel to the back. So I'm going to go ahead and select the first 10 layers on the bottom here and just paste the curves effect into these 10 layers or so. And as you can see, we have a very nice subtle front bevel as well as a back bevel. Just something very, very minor they can do. Now let's go ahead and focus on those side volume buttons as well as the lock buttons and the dock connector right here. So for those, I'm going to go ahead and duplicate another composition. So go into our front face. We're going to duplicate this one here, and we'll call this one volume buttons. Go into it. Let's go ahead and delete everything. And let's go ahead and create two little circles here. So I'm going to make it, I guess, a silver color. Let's draw a very nice small little sphere. And then we'll duplicate that. And we'll move that one up. So let's go into the contents and select our ellipse 2 path. And we'll just move it up. Just so we have two very subtle volume buttons for our phone. And then with our shape layer selected, let's go ahead and select a rounded rectangle tool here and draw a very small little placeholder there for our silent button. And then with that selected again, let's go in here and draw another rectangle inside here. So this one's going to be kind of a darker gray color. And that's going to be our switch. And once again, if you want to be more accurate, you can grab a PSD template and kind of mess around with those. But this is just going to give you a general idea on how to create these in After Effects. I'm going to change the roundness down a little bit. Maybe something like that. And then we can shrink it down a little bit. You know, something like that. And then we'll apply a bevel alpha to the whole thing. Drag it to our shape layer here. Now let's go ahead and composite this thing into our main comp here. So we'll go back to the main comp and let's go ahead and grab the camera and rotate it to the side. We'll drag in our volume buttons. And once again, we want to scale it down to the correct size, so 38%. Make it a 3D layer. Parent it to the control layer. And then we want to composite it correctly, so we're going to rotate it to the side here. Rotate it 90 degrees. And we'll just position it to the side of the phone. Just right there. And you may want to zoom in a little bit to get more fine detail. And then we want to move the volume buttons underneath our control layer. So now as you can see, we have our nice little buttons here on the side of the phone. And of course you may want to readjust this just a little bit, just so you kind of get it perfectly in the right spot. But I think that looks just fine for our demonstration here. So let's just zoom out here and just take a look. That's looking pretty good. And now we're going to do the exact same thing for our lock buttons on top as well as our dock connector at the bottom. So we're just going to duplicate the volume buttons here. And we'll call this one lock buttons. Open it. And we're going to delete all of these stuff here. We'll start fresh. We'll get the ellipse tool. Draw a nice little circle. And this is going to be our headphone jack. And then we can get another rounded rectangle here, zoom in, and draw a very basic lock button. You know, somewhere around there. We'll make it a silver one. And we'll just leave it at that. And let's just take a look. So we're going to bring that composition into our main comp. That will make it a 3D layer. We'll scale it down. And then we want to parent it to our control layer. And then we want to rotate it around. Make sure it's kind of flat here. So we'll set it to -90 degrees. And then we will rotate it. Like that. So we'll set it to 90 degrees. We'll move it up. We'll just center it up. We'll drag the lock button composition underneath our control layer here. Now let's go ahead and adjust the lock button. So just like that, we have our home buttons and our lock button, and then we have our headphone jack, and then we have our lock button there. Now let's go ahead and do one final thing, and that is to create the dock connector. So same thing, we're going to duplicate the volume buttons composition here. We'll go in there, we'll just delete everything, and we'll draw a very nice long rounded rectangle. Should be around this long. We'll set it to a nice black color. And same as before, we're just going to composite this thing into our main comp. So we'll call this one dock connector. Go back into the main comp. We'll drag it in, set it underneath our control layer. We're going to parent it to our control layer. Make sure it's a 3D layer. And let's go ahead and just try to composite this thing. So we're going to rotate it. Turn 90 degrees. And we'll just bring it down. 90 degrees. Like that, we created our very basic iPhone model. We have our dock connectors there, as well as our volume buttons and our silent button, and of course our headphone jack and our lock switch here. So just a really basic iPhone model, but it should get the job done just fine. And of course we can control and animate our gloss layer here. And if you want to control the position, scale, or rotation of the phone, just go into your control layer, and then we can rotate and change the orientations here. So because everything is parented to our control layer, we can just rotate and control everything here, and then everything should sync up as you see here. And of course, if it's a little bit too messy for you, we can go into all the extrusions here, select all the extrusion layers, and just hit the shy switch here. And then we can enable the shy switch for the composition, just so we have a cleaner composition. That way we only have the main parts here to work with. And then just like that, you're ready to build your scene. You can create a background, add some lens flares in here, and remember, you can change the screen content by going into the screen content composition and replacing this image with whatever you want. So just like that, a really basic iPhone model. Get to play around and experiment with the iPhone. There are many ways to create the same effects, so I highly suggest that you guys play around with it, experiment, add your own twist to it. If you're using Adobe After Effects CS6, play around with the 3D extrusions and extrude the phone that way. Or if you have Metal Shapeshifter, you can create an iPhone using that. Definitely play around with it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video tutorial. I know I enjoyed making it. If you guys have any further questions, don't hesitate to leave me a comment down below, and I'll get to them as soon as I can. Once again, I'm Vincent Wynn from the Creative Dojo, and I'll see you guys in the next tutorial. Bye guys.